everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Tonight is, we really want to welcome you to the Fight for the Castro Theatre, Lessons for Queer Preservation. My name is Rocket. I'm a grateful member of, this is not the right room for that. Unlike my esteemed colleagues here, I am not a scholar. I am a simple butch dyke who has a big mouth, and I get angry and very emotional when things like this happen to our community icons, and I was compelled to get involved. I'm a community organizer. I'm a Frameline volunteer for over 18 years. I'm a newly elected advisory board member of the Castro LGBTQ. Thank you. We'll see if that still holds after tonight. I'm not sure. I don't know. I've asked what it takes to get fired from the board, and no one will answer me, so I don't really have the answer to that question. The birthplace, before we get started with the panelists, I'd like to take a breath and try to calm down. I'm a little nervous. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to say a few things about how this evening came about. The birthplace, actually, of this event stems from the really diligent, thorough work of Shane Watson, one of our panelists, who devoted to finding out more and the details of what actually happened. There's so much that's been hidden from all of us. And if you're here, then you've been paying attention, at least to whatever degree you were able to during this process of the last couple of years. And I know I was really paying attention, and I was confused as fuck. I mean, I'm sorry. It was hard to pay attention and follow. If you had a job, you know, if you had a life to do anything, if you were fighting for other certainly worthy causes like keeping queers alive, you know, it's like lots of things are happening. So it got started from Shane putting this webinar together of trying to disseminate this information, to share this information in a more open form. The webinar didn't come to be, and I said that I wanted to help still bring this information to light so that people could have more information. You know, if we don't know what happened, how can we keep it from happening again? How can we continue to protect our sacred spaces, our sacred theaters, like the Roxy, like other queer spaces that we hold very dear to our culture? I joined this friends group of the Castro Coalition after the town hall meeting, and I wanted to help do some of the community work because these folks were really involved in the legal battle of, you know, their heads were in it. It's part of, in many cases, their actual work, only, of course, no one was paying them to do this work, but it's part of their milieu, certainly, to be researchers and to understand and to work on it. You know, if you were at any of the hearings, you might have seen even clips of Dr. Reck, Jen Reck here, who was the last person standing at the hearing that lasted for like 10 hours. That last hearing, you know, when it was just, it is a nightmare, as you all know. The community was intentionally split over this issue. You know, the obfuscation of the facts, the false narratives, the fake news that came out, like that we didn't want to have the theater repaired, or that, you know, that we were sold on keeping those particular seats, that no one wants to sit in those seats. You know, it wasn't about those seats ever. It was about the configuration, the movie palace style, the sloped floor, and it was always way more about the icon, the beacon of the Castro Theater that is a light that shines from the Castro around the world, for other queers and film lovers, of course, but I'm speaking for my own self and my own community of queers who see the Castro as a sign of a light of being able to live out in the open, to be able to live safely, securely, to not just be alive, but to thrive in a community and a town, a city, a state, the world, and feel like you can truly live and thrive. The Castro has been a symbol for that. It's not just a piece of real estate, as though that's how it's been treated, you know. And so while all this was happening and the Byzantine city processes of trying to get stuff done, they're taking our church. You know, our church that, excuse me, that has served as a home for queer culture, queer arts, memorials. Heklina's memorial was recently happening. Vito Russo's ashes are in the building of the theater. It's where we gather to celebrate and to mourn and to live our lives, you know. I want to get on to the panelists, but I wanted to say something about the timeline that was playing. I wanted to try to express, you know, some of the events that led to where we are, and there's no way that everything could have been included in that timeline that you might have seen if you were here. But it is a lot of important things, and these panelists are going to talk about a lot of those more important things. So tonight, what tonight is about is shining a light and pulling back the curtain on some of the really crappy stuff that happened, and with the hope that we can learn from it and we can understand it better, and that we can go forward with more confidence and knowledge that we understand what happened to us and to our communities, and to try to prevent it from happening again. So thanks very much, and I'm going to introduce the names of the people who are here. This is much more about these folks. I'll start with Shane Watson. Shane Watson, LGBTQ historian, California Preservation Foundation Board of Trustees. I mentioned her earlier, so you're going to want to hear what she has to say, as all of them, of course. Stephen Torres, former executive co-chair of the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District and former entertainment commissioner. Thank you, Stephen. Dr. Jen Reck, assistant professor of sociology and sexuality studies at San Francisco State University and executive co-chair of the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District. Peter Pastreich, executive director of the Castro Theatre Conservancy. Gerard Koskovich, queer public historian, advisor on Castro Theatre Landmark Amendment. And then our first speaker will be Christine Madrid French, historian, architectural advocate. She's an award-winning historian and preservation advocate, contributing writer for Vanity Fair, and executive director of Napa County Landmarks. So please welcome our panelists. Take it away, Chris.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank you for coming today, and I want to thank the Rossi Theater for hosting this discussion. And I think it's so important for our So my role here today is just to give you a very quick history of the theater, just to give us a context that we can base the rest of this discussion on. So the theater was selected as number 17 of the 50 most beautiful cinemas in the world by timeout.com. And so this theater is not just a place to watch movies, as Rocket was talking about, it is the cultural center of the community, the true heart of the neighborhood. So this building was actually referred to as the New Castro when it first opened up. It was actually, the old theater was housed in a space that you would know as Cliff's Variety. So the Nasser brothers included, it was a family business that included their sister as well. We don't hear as much about her. But they commissioned architect Timothy Pfluger to design this theater. So the Nasser family history and film started in 1907 when Abraham Nasser began showing moving pictures on a blank wall at the back of his store. So the family has a long history in cinema. So when this building opened, the San Francisco Bulletin posted that the new Castro is one of the most attractive theaters in the city, the facade being probably the most pretentious of any in the country. So Timothy Pfluger was only 28 years old when he designed it. Oh, there we go. Here's an older picture of when he was older, but he was only 28 when he designed this theater. And he also designed Oakland's Paramount, but the Castro Theater was the first theater that he designed. So he also designed, you'll see his designs everywhere. He did Top of the Mark and Nob Hill. So to create the ornate facade and interior of the Castro, he actually worked with 19 different contracting companies, all of whom are local to the San Francisco area. And this is a thank you note that he posted in the San Francisco Examiner. The theater was completed for $300,000 and included innovative details never seen before in San Francisco cinema. And the style of the theater is called California Churrigueresque. It's a derivation of a Spanish cathedral design. It was first introduced to the state in 1915 at that San Diego Pan Exposition. You can see a local example. I just walked over there today before the show started. The Mission Dolores Basilica is actually only 4 years older than the Castro. And I do think that it's interesting that Pfluger picked a religious type of architecture for the theater. And now we're looking at the theater itself as a sacred space. The El Capitan Theater, I put a picture up here, was built a few years later and was another prominent example in San Francisco. But there aren't very many, and as you can imagine, they are hard to maintain. So when the theater opened, the examiner noted that no effort has been spared anywhere to make the new Castro a beautiful monument to the art of motion picture presentation. And so when we think about 1922, when this building was opened, this was at the very beginning of the motion picture industry. They were showing silent films that didn't even have sound. Apparently there was a big frou-for-all later when they introduced sound and the orchestra was told with 2 weeks notice that they didn't have jobs anymore. So the theater actually predates even talkies. I did notice, and I just wanted to point out, that there was an advertisement in the paper when this theater came out talking about the luxurious seating as being one of the prominent parts of this building. So when we hear, whether the seating is important, is it part of the theater, it was actually a character-defining part of a theater. Otherwise, you'd be sitting in an auditorium. So this theater, they were really proud of everything there, including the seats. There are a number of works of art, custom works of art in the theater, including plaster murals by the Fagioni Company Studios. There was a team of Italian brothers that brought their techniques to San Francisco. They lived here. And I'd like to note here that other similar theaters to the Castro have recently been restored, including the Netflix restoration of the Egyptian Theater in downtown Los Angeles, where they spent $70 million to restore a building from the same period. And they reopened it on its 101st anniversary.
With seats.
With seats. With seats and showing films. So I think there is an enthusiastic audience, no pun intended, for these kind of theaters. So I wanted to sort of close out just with this idea that the theater has the spirit of the community is in the building at this point. It is a survivor, the same as we are, and I think it is a touch point to the past that allows us to look back, but it also helps us navigate an uncertain future. So the building then becomes much more than just a structure for the community. It is indeed the heart of the neighborhood. Thank you, and I'll take your questions.
Chris French's great discussion of the Castro Theatre as a neighborhood movie palace of central importance to San Francisco film history, let me offer you an overview of the period when the space became a site of international importance for LGBTQ heritage. In the mid-1970s, the Castro Theatre was a failing second-run movie house. Unlike other declining cinemas around San Francisco, the Castro Theatre managed to keep its doors open, and in a spectacular way. Starting with the management of Mel Novikoff in 1976, the programming shifted to Hollywood classics, movie premieres, film festivals, drag shows, LGBTQ fundraisers, and even queer memorial services. In short, a mix attuned to the Castro district as a newly booming gay neighborhood. In the next nearly 5 decades, the Castro Theatre gained international renown among LGBTQ people and film enthusiasts. One part of the structure that both remained constant and took on new meaning during this period is the vast main floor of the auditorium, known in theater parlance as the orchestra. The raked floor, the sloping aisles, the sweeping rows of fixed seats with plush red upholstery immediately marked the space as a classic movie palace. From the mid-1970s onward, the orchestra also provided the irreplaceable setting for cultural expression and community building, and for formation of film-going publics and LGBTQ counter-publics, which was widely observed as a phenomenon unique to the Castro Theatre. Particularly noteworthy in this regard are many exchanges between the stage and the house during film showings and live events, the ways audiences extend the stories on the screen by dressing in costume, reciting dialogue, or enacting scenes, thus transforming the seats and the aisles into a do-it-yourself space of cultural production and critical commentary. And the frequent interaction of the public with directors, stars, and other significant people on stage during special events. The movie palace seating is equally important as the setting where countless LGBTQ people have experienced safety, belonging, and shared culture in a crowded public place, in some cases for the first time in their lives. In addition, the seating is the location where celebrated visitors, including directors, actors, musicians, writers, and community leaders, have taken their place before being called up on stage during special events. These phenomena inextricably link the configuration of the Castro Theatre's orchestra to its role in community building and cultural production for LGBTQ people and film lovers. Quite simply, the orchestra is the physical anchor for the intangible cultural heritage that makes the Castro Theatre a site of international significance. Now, what do we mean by intangible cultural heritage? According to UNESCO, the United Nations Economic, Social, and Cultural Organization, which started establishing this concept in the late 1940s, and I'm quoting, "Cultural heritage does not end at monuments and collections of objects. It also includes traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants, such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events." While fragile, intangible cultural heritage is an important factor in maintaining cultural diversity in the face of growing globalization. An understanding of the intangible cultural heritage of different communities helps with the intercultural dialogue and encourages mutual respect for other ways of life. So our two-year-long campaign to fully protect the orchestra of the Castro Theatre was motivated by our profound respect for the LGBTQ intangible cultural heritage of the space and our deep understanding of the ways production of that heritage are inextricably linked to the configuration of the space. Let me close by noting that the landmark designation fact sheet for the Castro Theatre, written by Alex Westhoff of the Planning Department, a document for which I served as an advisor, explicitly acknowledges the movie palace seating as a, quote, defining characteristic, unquote, of the structure. The fact sheet further states that not only the overall form of the seating, but also the actual seats currently in the theater are historically significant. Although the seats are physical objects, were replaced in 1937 after a fire in the theater, again in 1976 after 40 years of wear, and again in 2001, the form and type of each replacement reflected the original seating. such replacement of fixtures subject to wear and tear is in keeping with federal historic rehabilitation standards. Perhaps most importantly, the seats currently in place were installed during the years which the landmark designation fact sheet identifies as the second period of significance for landmarking the Castro Theatre, the years from 1976 to 2004 that established the space as an LGBTQ World Heritage Site. San Francisco's Historic Preservation Commission voted to adopt the text of the landmark designation that I just described on February 1st, 2022 during their hearing, then proceeded to ignore the historical records set forth in the designation and immediately approve another plan's plans to demolish the historic orchestra. And let me say in closing here, despite what I would call alternative facts put forward by members of the Commission, despite the gaslighting that the entire Historic Preservation Commission conducted, those decisions tell us everything we need to know about the extent to which the Commissioner's primary concern was facilitating corporate wealth extraction and not sustaining LGBTQ intangible and tangible cultural heritage.
Years ago, Owsley Brown and Rob Byrne, two very active members of the San Francisco film community, both of them deeply concerned about the future of the Castro Theatre, asked me to help them to save the Castro Theatre. Owsley and I had worked together a few years earlier saving the Louisville Orchestra. Although I had spent most of my life managing and consulting the symphony orchestras, and I didn't know yet whether the Castro really needed saving, I loved the Castro, and I agreed to work with them. In July of 2020, I toured the theater with the architect Mark Cavaniero and the structural engineer David Marr. They found that the building had major problems, including some structural weaknesses, inadequate accessibility, serious fire and life safety issues, a non-functioning heating and air conditioning system, and many cinema-related problems, in addition to the need to restore the ceiling, the sgraffito murals, and the chandelier. The building was, in fact, in dire condition. And so we organized the Castro Theatre Conservancy, a nonprofit organization whose goals were to preserve the Castro Theatre as a cultural and entertainment venue for motion pictures, live performances, and special events, and to preserve and maintain the Castro Theatre's historic interior and exterior. As we got deeper into the project, we added a third goal, to assure that film festivals, live performances, and special events representing and serving the LGBTQ and other diverse communities would continue at the Castro Theatre. Our idea was to purchase this building from the Nasser family, raise $30 or $40 million for its renovation, and then run it as a nonprofit film society, similar to the Roxy, where we are today, and the California Film Institute, and to hundreds of such institutions across the United States. We organized, incorporated, and applied for tax exemption, recruiting a small board of directors and a larger working group of 20 prominent, capable, and dedicated volunteers. The working group was to develop policy and procedures for acquiring the building. If we succeeded at that, the board would be developed into a larger group with substantial fundraising and giving potential. In March of 2020, the Castro closed, and that July, the Nassers fired the entire Castro Theatre staff. The following August, we began discussions with the Nassers about purchasing the theater. When we were informed that the building was not for sale, we proposed a long-term lease. The Nassers agreed to consider a long-term lease agreement, and the Conservancy submitted an outline for such an agreement in October of 2020. But we never received a response to that proposal. 6 months later, Steve Nasser informed me that the family was about to lease the theater to an unnamed profit-making organization. We initially thought, based on hints that Steve gave me, that the organization might be Netflix, which had recently purchased and was about to renovate the Egyptian Theater in Los Angeles. Since our most important objective was that the Castro be renovated and maintained primarily as a home for film, we would have been happy with that outcome. When we learned that the leasing organization was in fact Another Planet Entertainment, and that their intention was to remove the orchestra floor seating, flatten the floor, and present mainly rock and pop attractions 4 or 5 times a month, we were disappointed and alarmed. From that point on, our objective was to find a way to force APE and the Nassers to save the seats and to keep the theater open as much as possible for cinema. We immediately allied ourselves with the Friends of the Castro Theatre Coalition and joined with them in what turned out to be mainly a political battle. The Conservancy established a Save the Castro website. We launched an online petition calling for preservation of the theater's interior, which garnered more than 12,500 signatures. We obtained endorsements from over 100 distinguished personalities, including Art Agnos, Joel Cohen, Francis Ford Coppola, Cleve Jones, Ang Lee, Mark Lino, George Lucas, Francis McDormand, Rita Moreno, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Tilda Swinton, Michael Tilson Thomas, and John Waters, among many others. We participated in 2 town halls, one of them called by APE, where their plans for removing the seats were booed every time they were mentioned, and hundreds of attendees spoke against APE's plans. We submitted 2 proposals to sublease the theater from APE, and when those proposals were rejected, we lobbied the Planning and Historic Preservation Commissions and the Board of Supervisors in an attempt to force APE to guarantee that at least 150 days and evenings per year would be available for film presentations, and at least 30 days and evenings for LGBTQ-related events. The battle against APE turned out to be a one-sided one. On their side, they had the Nassers' ownership of the building and a legally valid long-term lease. What seemed like unlimited funds to hire lobbyists and publicists, a widespread misinformation campaign stating that unless their plan were accepted, the theater would close for good, and a growing sentiment in San Francisco that governmental red tape was seriously affecting the city's economy, and that the valid objections to APE's plans being raised by the coalition were just one more example of bureaucracy standing in the way of a corporation's willingness to invest in a San Francisco project. In the end, we lost the political battle, although APE did promise a number of things that they would not have agreed to without the pressure brought by the Friends of the Castro Coalition and the Conservancy. These include the motorized risers with removable seats that should permit some reasonable sightlines for viewing film, and APE's pledge that 33% of programming at the theater would be devoted to film screenings and film festivals, and 25% to LGBTQ+ activities and artists. I have to point out that if APE continues what appears its normal pattern, we can expect 60 or so pop and rock presentations per year at the Castro. 33% of that for film, and 25% of that for LGBTQ+ activities and artists would come to 95 events a year. Our beloved Castro Theatre, once open virtually 365 days and nights a year, would be closed and gated 270 days of every year. I would also point out that none of APE's promises are legally binding on them. We at the Conservancy are proud to have fought shoulder to shoulder with the other members of the coalition and who have made their goal of keeping the Castro queer our goal too, as they made ours of keeping the Castro a home for film theirs. We're not going away. If APE fails to deliver on its promises, or if it finds that having so deeply alienated its new neighbors, it cannot make a profit at the Castro, we will be back. looking for a way to save the Castro for film, for queer culture, and for its community.
My involvement in advocating for the Castro Theatre began when Gerard Koskovich reached out to me in July 2022, representing the Friends of the Castro Theatre Coalition. At that time, they had organized a long-awaited walkthrough of the theater with APE's project team. This marked the first occasion that the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District had been invited to tour the theater with the architects, following 6 months of persistent efforts to be part of the community engagement process for the theater. The Castro Cultural District, by the way, is the city's officially sanctioned queer cultural group overseeing the neighborhood. Gerard invited me to join the Castro Theatre tour to provide my services as a historic preservation consultant specializing in LGBTQ history. The purpose was to ensure that APE was proposing a thoughtful preservation approach to their rehabilitation project. During the tour, the architects shared their plans for a completely demolished orchestra, featuring renderings of enormous, flattened, tiered sections for temporary seating. I immediately recognized that the project wouldn't meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are the design thresholds set for practitioners working on landmark buildings like the Castro Theatre. As we stood in the orchestra with the drawings displayed on the iconic stage, I pointed at the continuous rows of movie palace-style seating and asked if anyone knew when the most recent seats themselves had been installed. 2001, the architects were quick to shout, fully aware that the project's success hinged on removing those seats. The APE team was gleeful about the 2001 installation date of the existing seats because they assumed the seats would fall outside of the landmark's period of significance. A period of significance is the time period established in a landmark designation report showing which dates within a property's lifespan are considered the most important. As part of the landmarking process, character-defining features representing the period of significance are established. APE's architects assumed the 2001 seats would fall outside the theater's period of significance and thus not qualify as character-defining features, meaning they could be demolished. By the time I met Gerard and the other folks at the Castro Theatre in August 2022, APE had been on a charm offensive in historic preservation circles since the beginning of the year, lobbying both state and local preservation advocacy groups to gain early buy-in on their project, which they described ominously as the only way to save this severely deteriorating and underutilized architectural landmark. APE's architects had also been meeting privately with planning department leadership about getting their project through the approvals process. Meanwhile, representatives from the Castro Cultural District and various community stakeholder groups, especially the one Peter talked about, were begging APE and the planning department to provide them with information about what was happening at the theater. Begging. In April 2022, the Cultural District sent a letter to APE requesting basic community engagement. The letter was co-signed by the Castro Merchants Association, Frameline Film Festival, the Leather District, Friends of Harvey Milk Plaza, Harvey Milk Club, LGBTQ Democratic Club, Alice B. Toklas Democratic Club, the Queer Cultural Center, San Francisco Heritage, Art Deco Society of California, as well as many other important individuals. It said in part, quote, "We, the undersigned organizations and community leaders, are very concerned that changes made without input of the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District may result in the erasure or drastic reduction of queer culture at the Castro Theatre," end quote. The APE architects got a hold of this letter and shared it with the planning department before they'd even read it, soon after getting it from their client, APE. Instead of putting the whole project on hold and opening a dialogue with the coalition of community groups, APE's response was to officially file the Certificate of Appropriateness application for their project with the Planning Department. Included in that package was a Secretary of the Interior standards evaluation of their own project, written by their own team, which concluded that their project did meet the standards. And they even went so far as to suggest their own character-defining features that should be preserved in the theater, but they excluded the interior altogether. The same day the COA was filed, APE's architect emailed planning leadership requesting a meeting to discuss the cultural district letter, saying, quote, "We'd like your advice about how to move forward, knowing that this letter might generate some heat for the project," end quote. APE's architects ran into pushback with the planning department in their earliest draft drawings for the theater. The first round of comments in July 2022 pointed out that APE's architectural drawings had an alarming lack of detail in the project plans, including any reference to the building's significance to LGBTQ history in the project drawing report. A few weeks later, at the town hall hosted by APE at the Castro Theatre in August 2022, the public was shown renderings for the first time of the changes proposed in the theater. The response was overwhelmingly negative. The audience laughed at the tiered platforms. But again, instead of pausing to reflect and engage with the community, APE's architect resubmitted the COA application to planning a week after the town hall. Instead of listening to planning or the people at this point, APE's architect submitted a revised application package that ignored LGBTQ history altogether. The planning department responded to that package by telling APE's team that the updated landmark report, which Gerard was helping the planning department write at this point, was going to have a second period of significance. The original landmark report written in the 1970s had a period of significance of just the first period. I believe it was 1922 to 1936.
37, sorry.
Okay. So, understanding the need to amend the landmark nomination, Supervisor Mandelman's office initiated a landmark revision, and then the planning department authored that landmark revision. So, planning department went back to APE and said, look, everyone agrees here that this theater has a significance to LGBTQ history, therefore your project proposal should reflect that, and also the planning department introduced new character defining features which included the interior. Specifically, planning wanted to call out the historic configuration of the orchestra and the balcony as a character defining feature of the second period of significance, which was 1976 to 2004, I believe.
Use your mic.
Oh, sorry. So planning department, in a sense, caught this, and they said, you know, this theater is significant not only for its early architectural history, but for its LGBTQ history. And there are character-defining features that represent this second period of significance, the LGBTQ history. And specifically, one of those features is this, what the planning department described as a vast interior auditorium volume with raked floor and seating. So, a short time later, APE's architect followed up with planning and had the character-defining feature language changed, actually requested this in an email. We would like to change that to vast interior auditorium volume with raked floor and presence of seating. There was no pushback from planning. From then on, the term presence of seating was in every official document related to the landmark amendment when describing the actual seats. This was the project sponsor's loophole for being able to demolish a character-defining feature of the theater's second period of significance. If the character-defining feature of the space is merely a presence of seating, then that aspect of the interior would remain intact even after the seats had been demolished. Once our group got word of this, the Cultural District met with Historic Preservation Commission President Diane Matsuda, and we begged her and the Historic Preservation Commission to not adopt a landmark report with such obvious obfuscation intended to favor the project sponsor. We urged the commissioners to adopt clarifying language such as, quote, fixed theatrical style seating, end quote. Meanwhile, APE's team was lobbying the Historic Preservation Commission too, writing in a letter to President Matsuda, and this is a lengthy quote, but I'm going to read it in full. This email was written to the Historic Preservation Commission president right before the February 1st hearing when they voted on the landmark amendment. So, quote, although the HBC hearing was not directly is not directly related to the entitlement sought by APE, changes to the landmark designation for the Castro Theatre could have a significant negative impact on the ability of APE to proceed with the project. In particular, identification of the existing non-historic seats and the existing floor rake as character-defining features may preclude other seating arrangements that would support flexible and varied uses of the Castro Theatre. While the project is not before you on February 1st, the landmark status of the Castro Theatre is closely related and will have a direct impact on the feasibility of the project. On February 1st, 2023, the Historic Preservation Commission ignored all of us, everyone in the community, and voted unanimously to approve the vague language. Another Planet Entertainment celebrated this decision as a win. Instead of listening to the Castro LGBTQ cultural district and the community stakeholder groups, and participating in genuine community engagement, the Historic Preservation Commission was swayed by APE lobbying and adopted a useless landmark amendment, which ultimately provided the green light for APE's project to be approved at the Funding Commission. So, I also want to point out and say that this issue, the actual term, quote, presence of seating, end quote, went to the Board of Supervisors. Supervisors Peskin and Preston listened to the LGBTQ cultural district and listened to the Friends of Coalition and saw through the nonsense. Supervisor Preston attempted to amend the landmark amendment report to strike the presence of seating language and have it replaced with fixed theatrical style seating. However, Supervisor Mandelman, the district supervisor, ultimately convinced the board to defer to the Historic Preservation Commission's decision about the language. So in other words, the commissions were, deferring back and forth to each other. So all this is to say, the people who stand to make the most money off the Castro Theatre got their way with the city of San Francisco by suppressing the voice of the community most impacted by the changes to their neighborhood. Is this really how we want to do cultural heritage preservation in San Francisco?
Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for your continued interest and thinking about queer historic preservation and the Castro Theatre. In this part of the presentation, Stephen and I are kind of partnered up to where we have a goal where we are wanting to think about the political context that's surrounding the Castro Theatre and consider how what happened with this situation is definitely about the Castro Theatre, but the political dynamics extend way beyond the Castro Theatre as a singular entity. I'm a sociologist. I'm a faculty at San Francisco State University. I teach about sociology. I work as a researcher. So when I was involved in the advocacy for historic and cultural preservation of the Castro Theatre and learned about the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines that recognize the importance of intangible cultural heritage, that say, if culture is produced in a place and that place has documented meaning to a community, that this warrants historic preservation. This really spoke to me as someone whose whole career focuses on the importance of social data and evidence. For me, the extensive evidence discussed by our earlier presenters was clearly in line with the guidelines of this preservation policy, and it was uncontestable in my mind that this evidence demonstrated the historic significance of the interior fixed theater seating and slope floor. And when I look at the documented evidence of numerous classic theaters like the Apollo Theater that were operating successfully in a nonprofit model, public-private partnerships, as cultural institutions, it was clear that this was a viable option for the Castro Theatre. So, when these pieces of evidence were not seen as persuasive to those with the power to determine the future of the Castro Theatre, at first I was shocked and disappointed. My big queer heart was feeling that pain, and I was very focused on just being so confused, as I think we do this work, heart-centered and heart-forward, And so it was very painful. So I had to look to other things that I know and understand as a sociologist. And in analyzing the situation, it became clear that we need to really deeply consider how power operates within the city of San Francisco and the power dynamics that affect the ways decisions get made. It's this reflection and analysis that I want to share about today. So first we have to consider the overall political context of the world we live in. We're still deeply affected by the neoliberal political system that gained prominence from the 1970s. This placed greater emphasis on individual liberties, favors free market models, supports scaled-back government regulations, and considers the private sector and corporations as the core entities that should propel social change and policy. San Francisco mayors have long supported these approaches to city governance. An example can be seen in the second tech boom of 2010, beginning in 2010, when the city government provided tax incentives encouraging tech companies to settle and expand in San Francisco, and embraced housing policies favoring high-rise and luxury developments. The 2011 Twitter tax break was an infamous part of the city's overall plan to so-called revitalize mid-market by attracting massive tech offices to the neighborhood immediately adjacent to the Castro. The changes in the area really encouraged the construction of luxury condo buildings, rental complexes up Market Street and into the Castro, creating housing that's beyond the means of most LGBTQ people, and city policy, as we know, imposed only a bare minimum of affordable units. So these policies have deeply affected access to housing for San Franciscans across the city. They've also deeply affected the Castro neighborhood in terms of the accessibility of the neighborhood and the dynamics of privilege among those who can afford to live there, especially more recent transplants. So the core takeaways here, I'm sure all of us can see these elements in many, many areas of San Francisco that affect the community here. Individual rights, free market, less regulation, corporations having more control than communities. So this is really that overarching political context that we exist in and contend with here in San Francisco. So there are a few specific elements that we can point to how these dynamics of San Francisco politics really operated in the struggle over the Castro Theater. So first, the theater is privately owned by the Nassers. They're a real estate conglomerate and family. It's their private property, and private property eclipses community investment. Second, there was a clear deference, as the other panelists have outlined, to the claims made by Another Planet Entertainment and their supporters about the vision of the Castro Theater's future, without an adherence to process. So commissions and city supervisors continually told APE that they needed to do community outreach and work with the community. Those same entities continually and publicly acknowledged that APE had not done this outreach, yet those bodies still move forward supporting APE proposals without it. So as you know, historians provided extensive evidence and findings to city supervisors and commissions that spoke directly to the policies that they were considering. We continuously received messages that Another Planet Entertainment or other community stakeholders representing them would provide the same supervisors and commissions with counter opinions to that evidence, and that they believe those counter opinions. The dynamics of our current political power structure encourage people in power, as well as community members, to believe unfounded claims from corporations in the private sector over documented empirical evidence providing a different story. So as we reflect and learn from this situation, it's important to think about how the power differences work to make certain entities responsible to support their claims and others to just be automatically believed. It's very common for claims made by institutions of capitalist accumulation, like corporations, to be trusted and granted generally free license to dictate the terms of public discourse and social policy. So my final points are just to offer a few examples of the city and its power structures and how that affected what happened in the Castro Theater. So late in the campaign for the Castro Theater, we were informed that it was conveyed to the planning department that the Castro neighborhood had no interest in issues of land use policy. So planning, because of that, planning's routine processes of community engagement and outreach were not followed in the case of the Castro Theater. It's not clear how those ideas and directives are conveyed across different levels in the city, and so the way this form of communication and decision-making occurs is an important area of exploration. And so on June 14th, 2023, a press release from San Francisco Recreation and Parks revealed that Mayor London Breed announced a deal between APE and the city for APE to hold free outdoor concerts in San Francisco for 3 years, starting in 2024. This also included city support for permits that would allow APE to expand their annual Outside Lands Festival. The next day, June 15th, 2023, the Joint Historic Preservation Commission and Planning meeting was held. This was the final major meeting where decisions were made, and the commission voted in favor of APE's proposals to allow zoning change for the Castro Theater to become a nighttime entertainment venue, and for the theater's historic landmarking to allow the removal of the orchestra floor. So a great deal of the public discussion around the Castro Theater was that city agencies, the community, and local organizations and businesses should all work together collaboratively to support the viable future of this beloved theater. And this is clearly a learning moment that provides many areas for us to think about regarding the dynamics of power and influence that make an equitable collaboration between these entities quite difficult to accomplish.
Thank you, Dr. Reck. My name is Steven Torres. I am the former executive co-chair. I served alongside Jen at the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District. I'm also a former entertainment commissioner. Dovetailing off of everything that Jen was saying, what does this issue indicate about the broader future in a political context? I think the most important part is the changes in the regulatory agencies and processes. The Castro Theater is kind of like the canary in the coal mine right now. And what I mean by that is at the streamlining of oversight and regulations at both the state and municipal level, the implications that this, or the impacts that this is going to have on our neighborhoods could be devastating. And this is not just in terms of cultural density, but also in terms of small business. And the very existence of our city as the San Francisco that we know is on the line now, because everything that we think about in terms of commercial property is now up for grabs, essentially. One of the things that I think is important to focus on here is that there are efforts now to, just as it has been made easier for developers to implement projects across the state, regardless of them being affordable or not, in terms of development of housing. So here in San Francisco, there are now efforts that are being pushed through in possible legislation or propositions on ballots where things are going to be streamlined, quote unquote, to strip San Francisco of its inherent bureaucracy and all the red tape that is binding our hands as citizens and residents of San Francisco. When in reality, what it's doing is it's taking our oversight away from us. And I think it's important to understand that, and I think it's really important coming from the place of serving as an entertainment commissioner. As I served on that body, one of the most important parts of our work was being able to support and uphold and nurture the delicate ecosystem that is San Francisco in terms of residential and commercial properties and our nightlife industry. any efforts to strip that away will bind the hands of any government agency, any department. And whereas I acknowledge fully, as we've gone over the timeline of how this has transpired, that there is a lot of work to be done in terms of the misalignment that existed between the Cultural District Program, which is, as Shane said, a city-sanctioned entity within the City and County of San Francisco, and our corresponding departments, such as Planning and OEWD and the Arts Commission. There is a lot of work to be done there, but it would be so much worse, and will be so much worse, if these entities suddenly went away. I think an example of how we can move forward with this, and some takeaways in terms of how this issue specifically has already changed things, is that the planning department has acknowledged that they dropped the ball in this regard, and they have worked to align themselves. There is now an alignment program between the cultural district, all the cultural districts, not just the Castro, and the planning department. In my tenure at the Entertainment Commission, I worked with Entertainment Commission staff to make sure that there is now alignment between the Cultural District Program and the San Francisco Entertainment Commission, which I always want to say thank you to the Entertainment Commission staff, especially Director Weiland and Deputy Director Acevedo, because they understood how important it was for the community to have oversight over any project that entered their neighborhood, and they worked to make that happen. So now that is a part of the process that we now have a little bit of oversight over. As we move forward, we have to think about this as, yes, of course, lessons learned, but we also have to recognize that this isn't over. So much of what we achieved in this is still there. All the promises that Another Planet made, they're now codified. They're now held accountable for that. So, granted, as we've seen, there are different ways in which to circumvent city process. But now there's a financial obligation to that. And I think what is important to remember here is that if we want San Francisco to remain San Francisco, to remain the San Francisco that everyone comes to, we have to continue to advocate and fight for our community, the centering of our community, the centering of community self-determination. And that can only be done if we continue to have oversight over our own communities, that we are not being vilified, that San Franciscans are not perpetually being painted as the problem to quote-unquote progress.
Thank you all so very much. In Stephen's intro, I did forget to mention that he's a candidate for a District 9 suit. So, yeah. Always remember the people who actually show up and do the work, right? So now we do a Q&A. So if you've had that burning question or questions, Lex and I will be in the audience with a microphone, so hopefully this will be a relatively orderly process. I don't know how that's going to go. I have one of those mics. So I'll be on this side and on that side, and we'll just see how it goes. What?
Yeah.
Ask your question.
Thank you. Do we have the makings of a ballot measure to overturn the terrible measures that the government has shoved down our throats? Did you understand the question?
Yeah.
So, How do we make that happen?
I think there's always the makings of a ballot measure. For better or worse, but I think that I think it's I think that's what we all want to convey to everyone, is that the power is still in our hands, right? You know, that if we activate and we put our organizing behind it, yes, there are ways of fighting these things. I think what that looks like are different things. It's not always going to be ballot measures. It's not always going to be. I also would caution against retaliatory things like recalls. Those may scratch the itch in the moment, but they cost a lot of money, and then we don't get to pick who gets appointed after their recall. So I think that these are things that we need to remember. But I think also that there are other ways to strategize, and how you do that is by communicating and getting involved with groups like the Friends of the Castro Theatre, which this coalition still exists. It didn't die. It will continue to exist, and we're all connected by remaining in touch with organizations like the Castro Theatre Conservancy, with the Castro Cultural District. The Cultural District programs definitely need your help. Yeah, so I think that and the short answer is yes, there are ballot measures. It's just, it takes the time. It takes the time to write them. It takes the time to consult with the people that write those. So yeah.
Okay, we got a question over here.
Hi, and thank you for all your work. I have a few questions, but I'll start with this one, and I hope I word it in a way that's clear. I'm curious, do the rights of the property owners, private property owners in the Nasser family, do they in any way supersede, or is it the reverse of the sort of, demands of the historic preservation, cultural preservation of, this entity? Does that make sense to you? Or does one supersede the other in terms of their rights?
Christine, maybe, or
Shane, I think this is
Shane?
Yeah.
Sure. So I think you're asking if the property owner, the Nassers, had an impact on the decisions made about the project?
Or just does their right as private property owners supersede the community's sort of not community's rights, but the historic preservation aspect of the building? Does the historic preservation, does that take precedence over whatever rights they may have as property owners?
Which comes first, historic preservation or property ownership?
Because I'm wondering how we even got to this point,
Well, I think it's tricky. If you have a property owner who is not supportive of the project, in this case, the property owner was supportive of APE's project. So I think that factored into some of the commissioner's decisions. But in terms of historic preservation, no, none of that should have mattered. It should have been, strictly an objective look at what is the history of this site and what's most important here in terms of architectural features.
I might add to that kind of going back to what we were talking about a little at the end, is that so just what Shane is saying is true. Like the Nasser family agreed to the historic preservation back in the 70s in the first place. So they had every right to refuse back then. They didn't. And also nothing that was part of this expansion of that designation was inhibiting them from running it as a business. There was no part of that at least, as a theater anyway. And then what I will also say is that because of the bills that have been passed in Sacramento, that and those corresponding adjustments to ordinances here in the city of San Francisco and all the cities across California, that the power of development and real estate is going to supersede historic preservation, environmental legislation, There are multiple ways. I don't know if any of you saw it or are familiar with this site, but halfway between, or a little bit closer in Santa Barbara County, there's an old freeway stop called Anderson's. It's famous for its split knee suit. It just closed. And they said that the rumor is that it's going to be turned into a housing development. I would say that you're going to see more and more stories about that as the days go on. Right now, as Rocket said, I am running for supervisor of this district. One of the most frightening things to me is Mission Street. We have so much commercial property here that's solely commercial, but on its face, especially with the desperate straits that we're in terms of people needing housing, it would sound like, well, of course we need to prioritize housing over commercial property, but you do not live in a vacuum. This commercial property is also part of our ecosystem. It's part of how we live. Some of these businesses have been around for over 100 years. People rely upon these things. So if the person that owns that property there are no protections for business owners. So they can kick them out, they can knock it down, and a high rise of luxury housing goes up. So it's a two-part answer to your question. Yes and no.
I have a question. Hi, folks. Thank you for your work. So I want to ask follow up to what Stephen and Jen were talking about, the misalignment of the cultural districts. Elsewhere, there's carrots and sticks in politics. Not that the stick is never as strong to fight rapacious capitalism, but there's a couple examples that do work, and maybe there's the possibility of finding some tools for the teeth for cultural districts. And I'm thinking of how we once had redevelopment agencies that were able to fund a little bit of affordable housing with tax increment financing. I'm thinking of this week, Bloomberg City Labs had a story on a supermarket in London's Soho district that had, they have a rule on their books, asset of community value. And they said, well, you get 9,000 cocktails in Soho, but you need to have one place to get toilet paper. So what a rule, you know, and it's similar to intangible cultural heritage, a asset of community value. And so many political fights get to another stage because someone had a brainstorm and inserted 3 sentences in a law. So I don't know what the law would be, but it seems like our cultural districts don't have any teeth to enforce their requests.
Yep.
What do you think?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things about this situation with the Castro Theater is the conditions that were imposed by the commissions, as I think Peter might have said, would not have been there without the Friends of the Castro Theater Coalition and the advocacy of the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District. And even though there are many aspects of disappointment that we have over what happened with the theater, the cultural districts are aware of this. And this is a situation that actually is incredibly important for the cultural district program, I think, because this type of work is one of the main areas that we are charged to do from the city. And so other cultural districts were watching and engaging in what was happening with this, and it obviously becomes a big lesson and a big watch out around what power do cultural districts have, right? And so I think that I have a lot of hope that this situation can help, and I think it has helped already, to elevate the cultural district's profile, actually, and to elevate all of the cultural districts' kind of just like attention to almost like the work that we need to be doing and the challenges that we face to do it. And at base, the cultural districts are working for the communities that they're in. And so our strategies, our policies are all community driven. They're based on, you know, talking to the community and hearing what is important to the community. And so I think the power of the cultural districts to center community and to actually kind of have almost, to be building our voice in the city is exciting.
Yeah, I really like where you're going with this, and this actually goes back to the gentleman's question too. I think, yeah, there absolutely we should look for every creative way to codify things in a way that put more and more protections on things that make our communities, and not get tricked at the ballot box by promises to make our lives, quote unquote, easier by streamlining things. You should always be wary of when they say they're going to make your life easier. And to the gentleman's question, this would be one of those things. Like if we created a ballot measure by which the cultural districts become part of the city charter, because right now they're only part of the administrative code. You know, maybe there's a bond that gets passed that fully funds every single cultural district, because we're all really basically just rubbing two pennies together right now. So, you know, there's all sorts of ways, and I think that that's important to remember. Like, let this activate you, is, I guess, what I would say.
I've got a question over here, and then I see one right in there.
Hi, can you hear me? I have a couple of points to make, so please bear with me. I've been a planning commissioner for 6 years. I sat on the inside as vice president of the planning commission, and I know the power game. And Jen, you nailed it on the head, and Steve, you nailed it on the head as to where this is all going. This is the canary in the coal mine you're seeing here. Our own, let me call it a spade, our own gay or queer senator, Scott Wiener, has really set the city up to actually lose all community voices with some legislation that he passed through. If we don't meet our ridiculously inflated housing goals in a few weeks, we might lose all control over zoning and planning. I'm holding up a map here. I think people need to be familiar with it, that the entire Castro neighborhood is being rezoned at 85 feet height limits on Castro Street. That's not even, that's 2 stories taller than the Castro Theatre. So imagine the development pressure on rent-controlled units that can be demolished with the streamlined legislation, as well as the impact on small businesses when they lose their leases and a developer buys their property and they want to build any additional housing units. So we're facing an existential threat as a neighborhood because of all this. And as somebody mentioned a ballot measure, there is a ballot measure to actually take the state out of local land use and zoning. It's called Our Neighborhood Voices. Visit the website, ourneighborhoodvoices.com. It's the last thing standing in the way of Sacramento taking over. It's nothing about your community voice. So I just want everybody to know that.
Add to that, and so much of the mishigas that happened was all of the laying the groundwork they did for themselves in order to take over the theater. All of the neighborhood changes, you know, stuff like that was so buried and like last line things that they got past, and they did it within a few weeks' time. There was no time to organize a bunch of people to say, we don't want the neighborhood to be affected in this way, but it was fast and furious and buried. So, any of y'all speak to that?
I mean, I think it's, Shane, I actually would defer to you on this, but I think that, you know, like one of the things that I don't want to make this seem any more bleak, but, you know, with this rezoning and the streamlining at the state level, you know, the specter that APE kept holding over everyone was that if they didn't get their way, that the theater would be turned into a condominium or rock climbing gym, I think was one of the things that they kept saying. And the irony is that now that they have gotten their way to the extent that they have, it's that much closer to that situation, because as we have seen, the current members of the family that are holding the cards, at least, I just want to make a distinction there, because I know not all of the masters feel the same way, that they could sell the theater, and maybe they'll lobby hard to figure out a way in which they can make it vague and obfuscate to make it just the facade and parts of it in, like it could be a hotel or something. But Shane, I think it's important to let some input on historic preservation in the current time that we're living in regards to like the streamlining at Sacramento. Or Kristen.
I got something to say. Thank you. I think that's a really good point, is that if AP is investing $17 million plus into the theater and has a 20-year lease, then something else is happening as well. And this is what you're going to start noticing. Zoning changes, now people can, serve alcohol on the second floor. They seem like they're small changes. What will happen is after a generation, it'll take probably 20 to 30 years to see the full impact. But by then their lease is over and they're out of there. So it's really important for the community, like you're doing, to keep an eye on these things, because it is a generational passover, and it takes that long to really see the neighborhood impact.
A question here. I think there's another mic up there. Maybe
Hi.
Gerard. There should be another mic.
I also just wanted to ask a little bit about coalition building, because they're about to close the Safeway over in Fillmore without the consent of the community, and I know it has problems, but again, it is like a private owner, and the government don't give a shit what the people in the community needs. I also wonder, if the Castro Cultural District is a part of the Reck coalition, for instance, the Race and Equity and All Planning, which is mostly around housing. But I feel like these issues are the same, because a lot of the things that you all talked about, the ways, of government and the way people are using government to their advantage, it also is about housing, for sure. So I was just curious, if you've had any contact with housing groups or people in the Fillmore who are fighting a similar battle in a lot of ways.
Just to be clear, I'm not on the board anymore, but it's been, yes, the short answer is yes. Part of, so just a brief overview of the Cultural District program. There's multiple focus areas by which the cultural districts are mandated to like it's in their purview and they have to invest in, and tenants protections is actually one of them. It's under an umbrella of multiple land use things, but the way the cultural district program and the way that our coding is applied to it is very holistically based. Like this is that we look at these things as all being interconnected, that they don't all live in silos. In terms of coalition building, yes, I'm not going to speak for the district, but I think that the district is always interested in forming new relationships, bridge building. We did a lot in the 4 years that I was there, and there are members of the district that are here, and I think that what you said about the Safeway, that's another canary in the coal mine situation, just in case anyone doesn't realize it. I'm sure everyone does here, how awful that is, and what it is going to mean. And yeah, I think that there's always a possibility for coalition building amongst all the cultural districts, I think. I would say.
Thank you for all these great questions. I have one here, we've got several in the back.
I actually have two. One was just texted to me from another member, a friend of Castro Theatre Coalition. Since we're encapsulating this in history, I think it's important to remember that just a couple of weeks, or less than a couple of weeks after Abe sponsored the community meeting at the Castro Theatre, and we asked point blank, when is our next opportunity to appear, they never mentioned the Small Business Commission approval that Sharkey Ladwana put forward, that some of us ran pell-mell with less than 72 hours or just over 72 hours notice. So I think that needs to be part of the record that the Small Business Commission was part of this from the get-go. As a member of the front, I was honored to serve and be activists with all of you, and I will walk by the theater, we will walk by the theater with our heads held high, knowing that we did what we could. I did feel that the cake might have been baked from the get-go, but I have to say, and I said this in our Zoom calls, that the lack of pushback when the term the mayor of Castro Street, the real mayor of Castro Street was used by the PR spokesperson for Another Planet Entertainment, and in many respects the city of San Francisco on occasion. The lack of pushback from the cultural district was troubling to me, and I just want to put that out there. I don't know I still don't understand where the district's ability to push back is hampered and is not hampered, but that to me was an example of cultural heritage being ignored and not being addressed from the get-go when we deny Harvey Milk's heritage. So I just want to throw that out there. The question that came from another member of the Friends Coalition is as follows. After all the conversation around the seats, are Abe's plans for the removed seats known? Can they be donated to a queer nonprofit who needs them, or adopted by private citizens? Or can we expect to see a photo of them in a dump truck at some point?
I guess that's after I chain myself to them.
Let me jump in on that and say that our experience with AP from day one is like talking to a Donald Trump supporter. Every statement that they make is an alternative fact or an act of gaslighting. Their claims about what they're going to do with the Castro Theatre, I don't think we should take them at face value. Certainly in other venues they've made equally outlandish claims that they've never lived up to. With regard to the seats being taken out, I can guarantee you we will find out when we see a dumpster full of them in front of the place, if they are indeed taken out. And it will be up to us to try to salvage them. AP has no interest in working with the community. It regards LGBTQ people as an obstacle to its plans to engage in wealth extraction. And what hasn't been stated for people who may not be clear about this, which we finally got down to the nitty-gritty, why did they want to rip out the seats and the orchestra when you could run a successful multi-use venue there? It's because AP makes most of its money off of liquor sales. And so it wants to have people be able to move freely in a concert and go to bars inside the auditorium and not have to step over the person next to them. They don't have to share the alcohol profits with the artists that they book. So what they want to do is run a high-volume alcohol sale nightclub in the Castro for 1,800 folks coming to a rock concert, an indie pop concert, and pouring onto the street drunk once a week. And that was,
folks.
Well, 99.9% cisgender straight folks, largely from the suburbs, and as with their other venues. And so that was why we were fighting about these seats, but they were tied to how the place would be used and what effect that would have on the neighborhood, not just inside the Castro, but outside the Castro. And what we found at every turn was that AP's only interest in listening to us was to try to learn what we were thinking so they could try to kneecap us, often with hired toadies from our own community. And so you could presume going forward, if AP is saying it, it's a self-serving lie. Just proceed on that basis, and that they will behave with utter contempt towards our community at every turn. They have demonstrated that. They didn't manage in the whole time they were doing this to find one openly LGBTQ staff member of APE to come forward and talk on AP's behalf. They didn't have to go out and hire consultants. What does that tell you about their corporate culture? They don't have one openly LGBT LGBTQ employee to stand up on their behalf. If they're already there, they're hiding under their desks right now.
I do want to add just a piece to that, which I think is important, is that you know, they led with this, we're going to reinvigorate the neighborhood with bringing live music. This is more relevant to youth. All these kind of broad, unbased sort of proclamations, but one of their higher-ups told me in that tour that Shane and the rest of us were on, that their business model is changing. They don't make as much money off of live shows in their smaller venues as they do in their festivals and their large venues. And so what they were really looking for in the Castro was as a private rental, that this was going to be a private rental space. And that's what gave me as a, and I can say this now because I'm not on the commission anymore, but it gave me as a 25-year or 23-year nightlife veteran and a commissioner, it gave me pause, because it meant that there was no good neighbor. The good neighbor policy is part of the Entertainment Commission. It's to make sure that people are, you know, they are the right fit for the neighborhood, and that they had no plans to integrate into the neighborhood. They had no plans for curation. That this was something that they saw as a purely extractive implementation. And it also gave me pause because it indicated to me that they were probably not financially stable. And when we finally found out that they were several thousands of dollars behind at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, we now understood that they were possibly over-leveraged, that there were all these different components here that gave us significant pause in the coalition collectively. Like that this was bigger. It wasn't, and I think it's important for people to know that this wasn't about pushing back at a new player in the neighborhood because we're a bunch of crusty old Luddites. You know, it's like Peter said, the initial, full disclosure, I worked at the Castro Theatre many years ago. So the initial news that someone was taking over and reinvesting in it wasn't necessarily bad news, because I knew how badly it needed it. It was when we kept peeling away the layer of this festering onion that we began to learn each more putrid piece.
I have a question here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question about the political messaging side that has been alluded to in terms of the potential disinformation or getting through all the talking points that were in the community. Partly because I think one of the most interesting lessons that came out of this was that the queer community was actually pretty split on this. And I will tell you, I have plenty of smart, engaged, active queer people who completely support the APE plan and supported it, you know, maybe didn't support it initially, but I saw people move towards that over the course of the arguments. And I think I'm interested in hearing feedback on lessons learned on that political messaging, because quite frankly, a lot of what I saw was queer people responding to, oh yeah, you know what? The Alexandria Theater on Erie is a mess, right? These other theaters have closed. The Bridge closed, it's now a baseball academy. And there was a lot of lessons, or a lot of talking points that spoke to, yeah, if you don't let APE take charge of this, no one else has said, it's nice that you had statements from actors and prominent people, but no one was saying, yeah, I've got $100 million to take this over and buy the Nassau Tower. Right. And maybe there were behind the scenes conversations, but at least from a messaging perspective from queer people, there was a lot of queer people who were like, yeah, if you don't do this, the Castro Theatre is going to go defunct, and so I support APE. And I saw that actually change over the course of the debate and the Conservancy's involvement in it. So just curious about that element of it.
But the Conservancy believed there was an alternative, that the Castro could be saved, that we could raise the money to renovate it and to run it as a nonprofit. And we based that on a number of things. One is that it's been done in other places. It's been done beautifully here at the Roxy. It's been done in San Rafael with at the Smith Rafael building. It's not that impossible. It's not that difficult even. Well, so, but the Nassers own the building, and the Nassers may have presented themselves as caring about the building in some emotional way, but they only cared about the money that came out of it. They didn't take care of this building, they let it run down, and they extracted every cent out of it they could take. And then when it was going to fall apart, when at some point the fire department was going to tell them they couldn't allow people into the building anymore because it was a danger, they went looking for somebody who would give them the most money possible to run the theater, and that was APE. APE is just doing, in a way, I didn't like the way APE did what they did, but that's their business. They did exactly what I would have expected them to do, and they did it quite well, and they won. But the evil people in this, in a way, are the Nassers, who pretend that they cared about the building and all they cared about was money. Now, the question has been asked a number of times, well, why didn't somebody just show up with 100 million or 30 million? I got here just as Davies Symphony Hall was being proposed to go on next to the Opera House in Civic Center, and it was clear to people who cared about opera, symphony, and ballet in this town that another hall was needed. And so a group of wealthy people and civic-minded people went to the city and said, we want that piece of property, which is actually owned by the city. We want that piece of property. We'll build a concert hall on it. We'll raise the money. And then we'll give it to the War Memorial to run. And the city didn't say, well, show us your money. Well, where is it? How much have you got raised already? They had none of it raised already. And in fact, they were saying to the city, at that time to Moscone, to Mayor Moscone, maybe you could put in 10 million. We're going to need 40 million, but if you could put in 10 million of city funds out of some federal funds that had just come to the city, that would be very helpful. That same thing could have happened here. It didn't happen, and it didn't happen in a way because this wasn't a piece of city-owned land. It was owned by the Nassers, and they just wanted to make as much money out of it as they could.
If I can jump in as well, I think the question was very well put, and in part it responds to things that Jen was talking about in terms of us living in a culture in which corporations can make claims and they're never tested. Has anyone gone and looked at APE's books to find out if they have $17 million? They don't. That's just a claim that is untested, and yet on the other side, every claim is put to a test. So we're up against a real difficult cultural situation of a corporation must be right, it must have a ton of money, it wouldn't do this if it wasn't a good idea, and we were up against it with, here are historical facts, here's how the neighborhood will be affected, here are the possibilities, here's how a nonprofit goes about raising the money, and its claims are tested by, does it have a group of people who can raise that money? So it was very, very difficult. Anybody who has suggestions about how one can respond to that kind of barrage of highly well-funded corporate lies that people are trained by our culture to believe must be true because a corporation said it, well, I'd like to know what they are because we'd be very happy to do a better job covering that next time.
Yeah, and I think that that's combined with a very challenging economic situation that we're in. So like one example that shocked me was I was at a Castro Merchants meeting where they were discussing possibly doing a letter of support or not for APE's plans. And just in the conversation, lots of things were discussed, and one of the things was a proposal that they vote on certain conditions be met. One of them was to have APE do an economic study, like what would you call it? An economic impact report, thank you, to kind of say this is what we can offer to the neighborhood, because they kept saying, like, we'll save this theater, we'll save the neighborhood, the whole business community will benefit, right? And so they said, okay, do an economic impact study. And an APE representative got up and said, oh yeah, no, we've done that already. We already did that. And they're like, oh, you did? Like, yeah, we haven't seen that. And so then they later shared this impact study. I wish I remember the website. It literally was like a free website that you go on and you would answer 3 questions on the website about your business and then go submit. And then they would say, you are going to make millions of dollars. And then they would tell you how much profit that you would have as a business based on these 3 questions. And the merchants accepted that, like, right? And so I am, you know, an academic. So I was like, when you're in business, you should study things that would make your business successful, like, and actually figure that out, right? But I you know, that was kind of so shocking, but yet so in line with the fact that they were promising to save the neighborhood, and the business community is in a very challenging situation in the Castro, and struggling, and the city, right? And so you have like that element, and then I think your question is incredibly important because this really gets down to a long history in the queer community around very differing perspectives on social change and what kind of we as a community need and who we are as a community. And so this goes back to like the early 90s, once, you know, actually corporations again started doing things like domestic partnership benefits, health benefits for partners, and you know, let's have an LGBT employee group. And we started seeing that we actually could get rights within the kind of rights-based system of the United States. And so that was very appealing to us, especially after the devastation of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and all of the traumatic losses that we had and all the hostility and hatred that we faced. And so there was a lot, you know, going on to where our community felt very drawn in by that, because as we all know, that's what this country tells us as marginalized people. If we pass a law, you're going to get equality, right? And, you know, all marginalized groups know that that is not actually the case, right? But it's how our system operates. And so especially folks who can actually gain more privilege from those types of rights, they are very drawn in by that, right? And so it's very hard to say, because what we really saw happening in this situation was, honestly, once APE realized that they had a lot of opposition against them at the town hall that they had, all of a sudden, all of these APE supporters like came out of the woodwork with blue shirts and like organized and had a website and a name, and they showed up at all the meetings. And it's hard to say, because a lot of the front-facing folks were like white, cis, younger, gay men. But that wasn't the only group of people who were in support of APE, right? And so I think it's hard to say exactly what the composition of that group was, but you definitely saw a mobilization happening kind of suddenly, and it kind of looked like possibly APE helped fund that, but we don't know. I can't say that they did because I just don't have the evidence, but we're hoping to get it, right? But, and so it's just...
They get streamlined. There's a dollar figure there. That's what I was...
So this is the thing, is that this organization has a great deal of power to deter... People feel that they have a great deal of power to determine their future. And so you have artists and film festivals, and they want to be at that theater, and they want to succeed. And so when you have someone, like an organization that has an extreme amount of power, you know, it places artists and those film festivals in a very vulnerable position to speak out against them, right? And so this issue of like the division in the queer community around this, I think really is core to just like conflicts around what is the Castro future, what do we want that future to be, who can speak for our community, and how can we honestly challenge the structures of privilege and oppression that exists within our community.
Thank you everyone for contributing to this. We have several patient people here who would really like to get some questions in, so if everyone could try to make it possible. So more questions, okay, awesome.
Thank you. Thanks, and I guess following up on this, I mean, maybe we got caught off guard, and you know, I saw everybody fighting so hard, and I went to tons of meetings, and I saw everyone fighting so hard, and it felt like a lot of the fight was in City Hall, and I would personally like to see more action in the streets. You know what I mean? Like more direct action, perhaps. And you know, maybe there's still a way to fuck them up. Fuck up another planet, fuck up the dancers. I mean, I'm too old, I'm 58. But I'm too old to do that. So occupying, you know, offices, occupying fucking Scott Wiener's office, whatever it takes. I think, you know, I was in ACT UP with Gerard, and you know, we need to zap them perhaps. Make some of the younger folks get creative and fuck their shit up. But I just real quick need to just say something about the Redstone building. It's the Redstone Labor Temple. It's right down the street. 16th Cap. It's got a long history for labor and queer organizations and activities. I'm a tenant in that building, commercial tenant. We're barely hanging in there. We have no idea what to do next. We might ask for people to come help us picket out front of the building because the landlords are fuckers. So I guess in the meantime, you can like Save the Redstone Labor Temple on Facebook. Thank you. If there's going to be more street action, or what, is there any response about that?
Well, I can speak to that. It's really difficult because it had been really difficult. The whole ball of madness was really hard to disseminate into a placard. It was hard is all. And maybe an excuse, but it's the reality. So if and when there's a time to show up and protest, all I can say is watch Facebook. That's the best way I know to get the word out. A group that I am with is San Franciscans to Save the Castro Theatre, so if you can follow that, that's awesome.
I wanted to say that direct action is absolutely super impactful. It's a big part of our history, our culture. But one of the things that we really had a hard time trying to let people know about, and honestly, they started us out. We were on 2 years of fighting them and flagging, and that's when they activated or were able to find friends within both government and in the neighborhood to source a group that would speak on their behalf. That it was hard to get people to turn out, and I think that we have seen recently that there is still the power of the people and turning out to City Hall makes a big difference. And it's also about staying informed. Like this, it goes back to this, like we can't lose this power of oversight. Like one of the last things that slid through on this whole Castro, the Castro Theatre, was that they rezoned Castro Street so that every second floor commercial building could potentially become a place of entertainment. Another planet asked for that, and this supervisor's office sponsored it. We were originally told that that was going to be used as a leverage point to make sure that the community's interests were served, and it just kind of got approved with everyone else, and a lot of residents who live on Hartford Street and Collingwood Street who are going to be directly impacted by this came out in droves because they were told that this was the only way to make the neighborhood safe again. But now there's like every one of those hair salons, all these different, those are all commercial spaces. So you have to think, you have to read between the lines on these things.
Just FYI, Lex from C. We only have time for a few more questions because we do have a screening after this because we are an operational movie theater. So you are next, and then this gentleman's been very actively and patiently waiting. So thank you all for keeping it brief.
So the question I have is the possibility of an alternative framework, which would be more politically, I guess challenging, but has a lot of potential to rectify the problems, which is to say, instead of private ownership and some degree of oversight, actual municipal ownership and operation of cinemas. I mean, obviously that's going to be a harder political task. It's also relevant not only for the Castro, but many cinemas throughout the entire region. We see all landmarks. We've only got a lot of cinemas which are just sitting empty. I've talked to some council members in different areas, such as Berkeley, who have seen potential in this, but also see they're not in the business of running movie theaters. And I think, well, how can we make it easier to both make the pitch it's worth the acquisition cost, but also that it can be pretty possible for a turnkey solution or whatever for cities to run a municipal cinema.
We actually, hold on. We actually explored the possibility of eminent domain, of getting the city to take the building. We talked to the War Memorial as to whether they would add that to the properties that they were already running, whether they'd add the Castro. And we didn't get any place with people. I think we spoke to the people who could have made it happen, and for various political and financial reasons, we didn't get any place. So it remained a private business. The Nazis owned it, and they and APE, they had really the tradition of ownership on their side. And the longer that we fought, the worse we were doing, really, because it started to feel, the people that we saw coming in at the end, right, these young, gay, well-dressed guys who we hadn't seen at the beginning at all, they were, I'm not sure that they were bought off. They were there, they may or may not have been, but they were there because many of them really believed that this was just another obstacle being thrown up in the way to stop a corporation from doing good in the community. In putting money into a business, and there's a belief out there that's very common in San Francisco. Anything you want to put a porch on your house, and it takes 2 years to get approval if you get it, and all of your neighbors can object to it, and if they object to it, they all get a hearing, and that's what we were up against. Really was. And the longer this thing went on, the more we were up against it. Those people weren't there at the beginning. At the beginning, really, we had an enormous force for stopping APE. But the longer it went on, and APE was very intelligent in getting every one of these meetings postponed and postponed again and postponed again.
Donald Trump.
And exactly what Trump is doing. Exactly right. And the more time that they had, the more it looked like this was just another obstacle in San Francisco to keep a corporation from investing money in the city.
I want to jump in with a bit of a hopeful message as a historian, standing way back from this, and that's that social change and bringing about transformation of these kinds of fundamental attitudes of corporations are good, private money will solve everything, it's a long haul of activism and organizing and sticking with it and saying we're not going to give up with one defeat. In fact, I look at this as not being much of a defeat. When we went in and we're up against a giant corporation and the property owners, we ended up with 5 out of the 6 members of the Board of Supervisors members supporting us, a large part of the community supporting us and understanding what happened, all of you here. The fact is that this was, looking at it as a historian, a lost cause from the outset, and we got amazingly far because of the solidarity in our community. My message is, stick with it. Continue to come up with these creative ideas we're hearing that are practical, or that are policy ideas, or their tactics. That it's a long-term fight, and there are many more really important LGBTQ historic sites that are in the crosshairs of predatory real estate speculators and corporate wealth extractors. And so it's going to be up to us to just take a break, take a rest, maybe feel a little defeated, a little despondent, and then say, yeah, that's how long it takes to win these kinds of fights. Sometimes it takes more than one generation. And we've made our contribution. All of you have made that possible. So let's be prepared to have a snack, have a nap, and get back into the fight.
And to build upon that optimism and to answer what you're asking is that, yeah, we have to start looking at things differently. We have to start looking at things more creatively, like the way that the city looks at things. And this goes back to what we were talking about, the Safeway, is that, you know, we always talk about San Francisco as a world-class city, and that's usually the way that some folks are going to use it to say, this is why we need a corporation here, or we need this, or whatever. But if we are a world-class city, and I believe that we are, other world-class cities have city-run mercados, or public marketplaces. They have city-run housing. They have all these things that help sustain the city. So I think that, yeah, we need the city to do better in making acquisitions along these lines, especially as we are staring down the barrel of losing our cultural density, of food deserts in every neighborhood, especially when corporations like Safeway are going to jet, especially when corporations very possibly on another planet are going to jet. So we have to demand of our leadership in city government at every level that they're going to look at things more creatively, more strategically, and differently.
Question right here. Barbara, this is your chance.
Hi, I was one of the people who saw how the sausage was made at all those meetings. And it was, they did wear us down, but it really was only those last two meetings at the end when the blue shirts showed up. And I swear to God, there's a high-rise on Hartford Street right now that all those immediate neighbors lived in. Because there's no way that all the people that spoke up at that meeting, who were immediate neighbors to the Castro in their blue shirts, were actually immediate neighbors. But to that point, the game was played, and so were we. And I think by acceding to all that, and not, once we saw that Mandelman had bullshitted you guys, it was my assumption. I don't know what went on, but there was, to those of us who were just soldiers, a bit of a lack of transparency. And I think if things were really more public and more open all the time, more people would have gotten mobilized. We wouldn't have been run over at the very end like that. And I think, moving forward, we have to take the initiative. We have to set the rules of the game, because politics comes down to money talks, bullshit walks. And the money is always going to be there on the other side. The money is always going to be talking. And we have to change the rules of the game.
Yes.
We have no time, but I would like to invite each panelist, if you choose to give a final statement, or if you don't choose, then that's okay too.
I don't have time to quote from it, but everyone should look up on the, just Google, Harvey Milk wrote a very compelling letter about the Castro in support of the landmark combination in 1977, and it's widely available. But read it. He talks about the exact same things that we're talking about today. So that spirit perseveres.
I'll simply say thank you to everyone who came out tonight, to everybody who at every step along the way provided incredible support, encouragement, passion, demonstrated that it was about our love for our culture and its memory and its moving forward to continue to invigorate life in our city. And so let's remain focused on that goal. The Castro Theatre is a setback, but it was part of a larger movement, and I hope we all engage.
Yes. I just want to add and say that to all of you who showed up and wrote letters and were at those hearings for hours and hours and hours with us, none of it was for naught. I just want to say this, for me, was probably the best example I've ever seen of a grassroots coalition of people coming together for the same cause. So many different community groups with, you know, varying interests, but coming together just for the love of this space. So thank you for showing up. It wasn't for naught, and I really do think that we can change how cultural heritage is practiced in the city of San Francisco moving forward. So thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you too. It's been a great experience for me to be part of this, and that all of us who worked at the Conservancy found it, in spite of the frustration of not having succeeded in what we were really after, we found it an inspiring experience to work together with everyone who cared so deeply about the Castro Theatre.
Yeah, just thanks everyone for showing up and all of the work that many of you did during the course of this campaign. And I just want to thank you for your wonderful questions and comments tonight. And I just think that they are really kind of instructive for all of us and can be really inspiring for all of us to really think about what, you know, aspects of this discussion tonight, what question, what comment really sparked your interest. Where do you think change needs to happen, and how might that happen? And take this as an opportunity to consider how you want to engage in the future, and I know that I'm going to be doing the same. Thank you.
I just want to echo the gratitude of my colleagues here and show gratitude to them, but also to all of you. You should feel proud of yourselves. And I really appreciate the comments in regards to, you know, what you felt should have been different, and especially in regards to, you know, maybe even, I know that we tried as much as we could to keep the community informed, and I think that, you know, Christine was mentioning Harvey Milk, and one of the things that was really, I think, one of the key things about his candidacy, and then also like him serving as a supervisor, is that the rapport that he had with the community, and the community's understanding and knowing that they had to turn out. And I think that this is something that we've seen, like how that still is so important. Like there are roles that we all have to play, and your voice matters just as much, I would argue more, than any of ours. So anytime there's something that makes you angry, you should tell everyone. You should tell everyone that's going to listen. You should go show up to public comment. You should demonstrate. You should do all those things. Don't let these things slip away from you. This also hasn't slipped away from us completely. So stay engaged, stay activated, and thank you so much.
Before you all leave, I just wanted to say a few words. Thank you to all of our truly distinguished, heartfelt thank you for all the work you put into this. And huge thanks to Rocket for organizing this. It was much needed, so thank you so much. And then I want to let you all in on a little secret. We don't want the Roxy to go away, right? That's not the secret. But the secret is we are actively exploring and trying to buy this building. So, Castro, a family owns the Roxy. Doesn't happen to us here. And if you want to be a part of that, if you want to have hope in us, saving the Roxy for another 110 years, I would love to chat with you, love to talk to you. So I hope you all leave with a little bit of hope that this historic cinema is here to stay.
so much that we can have a ticketed event for a discussion about stuff that has already happened. You know, like what other town can you do that? To have this many people show up and be still engaged about something that is so heartfelt and critical. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for our distinguished beloved panelists for all the work and thank all of you for coming. Thank you to Reck for the rock scene. Thank you to our sponsors, the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District, Save the Castro Theatre Conservancy, who am I missing? Thwarted, that's everyone. Thanks everyone. Thank you. Go forth and prosper. Support Roxy.